Alright then, good evening everyone. Welcome to Tournament Point. I am as always Rillian with the 2MK team. And today we're going to be looking at how to prepare for tournaments as lower or mid-level players. One of the main things we want to look at today is how to prepare to gain the most possible from losing within the actual tournament setting and the emotions related to that. So I'll be going through some bots, just poking at them in the background. Some of them have relevance to what I'll be saying, some of them won't, but you generally should not actually need to watch this stream. It's more of a podcast style thing with stuff going on in the background. Therefore, if you have other stuff to do, you don't need to let me take up your visual processing. We'll start off with Galbot 2.0. You'll note, of course, that I'm playing from Amara's side today to do most of these demos, since my site is generally used for specific bot experiments, and this is where we store finished versions. Going into any reasonably large tournament, anyone who wants to make it to the top of said tournament is going to make sure they know most, if not all, of their competition. Even if they don't necessarily think that they know you as a big name or anything, a lot of people out there don't take any chances. Although this is a slightly modified Galbot 2.0, which is why he actually uses his V-trigger. The best you can get out of a tournament that you expect to lose, that you expect the best in the world to be at, or just people who are better than you as a whole. The most you can hope for is to confirm your work, practice, and skills. Generally, your aim therefore should be, don't get freaked out enough to drop things that you've trained, and make sure that if you do lose, which is what we're expecting to happen, that you lose to something you already know you didn't have enough experience with, and can then take away from that that you could have probably kept on going if you had managed to deal with it. In other words, you want an action item once you leave. Given the amount of time that training in most fighting games takes, you're not going to be able to train up too many things in that tournament time, and you're only going to get basically one chance. It's very seldom that you end up facing one person twice in the tournament too early and then have time to go practice somewhere to deal with the little thing. And even if you did, chances are, given the level that we're playing at, you couldn't have done that much about it. But while the rest of the team has specific things that they are working on, they've at least been working on them. So even if someone does bother to research us as opponents, they'll mostly either find things that have been fixed or things they might not want to risk trying to take advantage of if we're just watching streams and going, oh, they can't do this, can't do that. This isn't as true for me, especially since I'm about to give a stream that shows basically every weakness I have and everything I couldn't do. But In the case of my character, it's usually a little easier as Chun-Li's problems tend to stem from either not confirming into enough damage at particular spaces, mindset stuff, or execution issues that are hard enough that your opponent really didn't have much influence as to whether or not it was happening. Plus, of course, for me, if there were such a situation where I really felt the opponent was beating me because they knew something about me from somewhere else. We're only discussing Chun-Li weaknesses today, so Colleen's stuff was likely to be different. So let's look at things from that perspective. What can't I do and know I can't do, and therefore I'm hoping to lose to, or lose because of. This isn't often execution things for most characters, because as noted, not all of the characters in this game have particularly difficult execution. It's usually awareness and timing. There's much less expectation that you will drop your combo directly, and much more expectation that you will not understand or misunderstand a situation and fail as a result of that. We will talk about a little of that too, but given that in this case the two of them don't matter that much, the result will be the same, we'll use that to stand in for those sort of problems. As mid-level players, we all have weaknesses and tendencies that work particular ways. For example, from the tendencies perspective, we were discussing this morning, occasionally Street Fighter V has small things that you're supposed to do 10 of or so in order to get some points, right? Well, fight money, really. And I was joking with Amara that she's definitely at some point had the land a jumping attack 10 times one, and managed to have an entire play session and not get it. Why? Because Amara doesn't jump. She's working on it, but back then she basically didn't jump at all. Similarly, depending on how they count anti-airs for the current one, it's entirely possible that I will finish out a play session without being able to get the point required for perform an anti-air attack 10 times. This would only be true, of course, if there are no points for air-to-air attacks. And I'll probably still get it eventually, just because people jump, sometimes they get ES Bird. But this, in contrast to OmniRabbit, who will normally get that sort of thing in like one match. In my case, it's not specifically a weakness that I don't anti-air, because my spacing is different, and I tend to air-to-air or air-throw people. But I have trained certain anti-airs recently. The main reason I'm not worried is because they don't come up that often. Therefore, what I worry about, what I'm hoping is the reason I fail, is complete character unfamiliarity. Either I go to G, maybe Ibuki, I still don't quite have that down, or Sagat. But I have a couple more days to fix the Sagat problem. In fact, let's poke at that a little bit now. This is, of course, the purpose of having these bots. Even if the bot itself isn't specifically a simulation of the person who you're going to be fighting against, you will generally at least know which moves you have to deal with, differently as we try to make almost all moves that you could use, or that most people would use, available in bots, even if only rarely. So, while this is what I'm hoping to lose to, I would also hope that whatever little I can pick up about Sagat from fighting Sagat bot at least means that it's not super easy for my opponent, and that I end up learning something that I can take with me after the tournament and grow from. Generally, Chun-Li and Colleen don't do well against zoners. And when I was playing more impatiently, I really didn't deal with that very well at all. If you've been watching a while, you know I've worked on certain parts of my playstyle to make it a little easier on myself. And that's worked out okay, so I'm not really worried about that aspect of it. What I'm watching for here, therefore, is when Sagat moves away, what is my flinch reaction? And how often do I get hit by Tiger Shot? There are quite a lot of times where, as the bot specifically asks you to do, you are supposed to jump at him. You're supposed to jump at him and punish him for throwing Tiger Shot. However, Chun-Li's jump is slow and relatively floaty, which means quite often you'll see, just like there, if he did the light kick, even if the light kick whiffed, he had time to uppercut. And it's not as simple as pushing back on him with your own moves, even though she can still actually go under those, which I've just learned. For some reason I expected she would not be able to. But clearly Neko Punch is the best. So with that piece of information picked up, I have to decide whether or not I consider it worthwhile to actually practice it, and what it would gain me if I did. Sagat as a character doesn't have a whole lot of ways of punishing Chun-Li for doing it, especially at the range he wants to stand at. Depending on the tiger in question, it may be easy for her to get around it. The second thing I was testing was just demonstrated. You should generally test against a new character or a new bot to see if your basic tactics that you like to use on everyone else somehow fail against that character. There's always a possibility that some weird interaction of hitboxes causes this to not work. Unfamiliar spacing is also a danger. Once you've pinpointed that, you should be able to look at it and decide, am I going to be able to train this in time if it comes to that? Or should I just expect to lose to it? It will help you not get as flustered and maybe think of a different way through the match. And if not, so be it. For example, I've quickly realized I probably can't react to those at the range I would like to. Since the guy has no real reason to stand that far away from her, the chances of me actually doing that are relatively small. And since he knows she can't just jump the way most characters can, a serious Sagat player, probably came from a background of some other Zoner character, and has at least a decent understanding of why it is easier to anti-air Chun-Li. But let's look at something else that I want to be able to do that is not necessarily character specific, but might be different for Sagat. I've been comfortably learning to use instant airhead stomp on other people's wake-ups. Depending on their response, this can be really dangerous to them. And it's not too hard to create a true mix-up for a lot of characters. Nope, faster ones won't do that either. But of course, the timing for this is specific. There are a few knockdowns she has where it's just a good idea, and then there are other knockdowns where it is not and has to be manually timed, and I'll do it anyway because it freaks out the opponent. But what I'm counting on some opponents not knowing, or rather being too pressured to think about, is that a lot of their wake-up options go completely under this attack. Depending on my timing, I can use it to bait certain things easily on wake-ups. But it's important to know whose invincible wake-ups don't fall for this. For example, it can't be done on Ryu with that expectation. However, it can be done on Ken. And there are other characters that require testing as well. For example, Falk. So, we'll come back to Sagat in a bit. I have at least enough data to know that if he thinks he can do light Tiger Uppercut, or even medium Tiger Uppercut, most likely Chun-Li will go over his head and land before he does, and maybe get a good punish. But if I had found that he actually wins, and I wasn't able in time to make myself equate Sagat with Ryu, I could easily lose a match simply by going for this and getting hit, because I basically either autopiloted it or couldn't come up with something better to do in that situation in that space of time. Certain spacings of his EX1 may also cause this problem. And we'll be going back to that later.
I'm ready. Now begin.
One may wonder why people would go to tournaments if they have a strong expectation they're going to lose. Well, most higher level players are going for that feeling. The feeling of everything I have trained to do, I hope and expect to actually manage. Because once you've reached that point, you can be certain that you will keep on improving and performing better as you learn and train and practice more things. On the other hand, if you fall apart in a tournament setting, no amount of direct training is as likely to help you, and you may need to get more psychological things involved. thing in question, of course, is easier to test simply by knocking Falk down and have her do it on her wake up. So let's simply do that. After all, that's why we have all these other options. And if you're not too familiar with Street Fighter, it does save them all at about the right time, so... There's one. Too early. Interesting. What will that actually play out as? That should work. Note that, of course, if you want to record these things, you need to set the meter beforehand. So let's set Falk's Wake Up Action 3 and give her some meter. That's relatively promising. That is approximately the timing, but I can't be sure because it's this knockdown that has it. Seems to work on back roll too. Is she punishable after that is a different question. But she should be crush counterable, so we'd be able to find out that way. Note that, as usual, you have to set the recovery, but we're leaving it on random because I just need to see everything, so for now we'll just do it the other way. That is the other version of it. There was no way that that was going to be safe though. After all, invincible move. But let's give these two back instead. Okay, that was something. And that said, Wake Up Action 2, which means that if they mess up the reversal in the way I was doing when I was trying to test it, they do get hit. And there's the other. There is something to be said for the walk back, but it's not easiest to time, so you generally don't want to mess with it. Still, might work enough on certain people, and the range that you can do it from and how long you can delay it all matter. Since that move is not as invincible, obviously more or less the same thing happens. But since we're with Falk, let's turn the bot back on. And look for things that you know you haven't covered. In short, we're not actually fighting the bot in this case with the intention of practicing anything in particular. We're preparing to lose. Preparing to lose, preparing to fail is both helpful in helping you come up with better strategies to deal with situations, just in case you think you can beat the opponent but they've found something to get past you. How do you avoid that situation entirely? Or how do you lame it out to win by getting just like life leading stick in there? There's an example of something I don't have very well. When Chun-Li's forward heavy kick was changed to be a crush counter, she also lost certain properties of it. Similarly, not that I should ever be bothering to punish her Psycho Schneider with a stand medium punch, but there's a lot of stuff Falk does where a stand medium punch seems like a good idea but doesn't reach. Chun-Li has this problem against quite a few characters where everyone else's stand medium punch does the job and hers does not. So does Sakura. This is usually fine, as she has a good crouch medium kick. So it's only really important if you need a precisely 5-frame punish. Or don't feel you could use her light punch to start whatever you wanted. So what we're looking for is anything you've picked up from fighting against the character and losing in ranked, in battle lounge, wherever else. You just can't seem to get right so that you can expect to lose to it. Whether it be failing in execution in a crucial moment and therefore trying to avoid that moment as much as possible. Forgetting a variant of a combo and therefore creating a scramble situation, or having the same thing happen because of unfamiliarity with the opponent's character and their hitboxes or hurtboxes. So back to the question of crush counters. When Chun-Li's forward heavy kick does crush counter someone, just like when she actually manages to get you to block it, there are about 6 different combos she needs to be able to do. There is one way to deal with the situation no matter what, and that is to just chain it into her EX lightning legs. This is definitely a good thing, but there is always the chance that you're lost in that situation of, I actually don't have meter. I was going for this because I expected something to happen and I don't actually have any meter to confirm it. Now what do I do? Because interestingly, at the max range that this can hit and crush counter, the behavior of her standard light kick legs is a little off. It hits, but the spacing you end up at can't lead into anything. And for certain characters, you're putting yourself in danger. Therefore, my point is, I have the expectation that if a match really comes down to my spacing or confirms or combos from her forward heavy kick, and I lose because of it, but played well otherwise, this is good. This is particularly important if for some reason the matchup in question requires that I try to use it in order to get advantage, but fail. Similarly, there are certain conditions under which I'm not practiced enough to use her lightning legs as an instant air attack. Because it is a full move and the buffer timings therefore don't help you, being able to do it on demand is super important if that's how you plan to play a certain matchup. I'll try to avoid it as much as I can, but if I lose as a result of feeling like I can make it and then being wrong, that loss is not one that I should take to heart as a complete failure. That is me having the information that says, I really need to practice this more. It came up. It was real. And real enough to make me lose my space in a tournament. This is generally what Sandbag Casuals is for. Hence why we're doing this in that time. At least if you are here and expecting casuals, it's not a complete loss to watch me grind Chun-Li stuff for like an hour. But if you are thinking of going to a tournament for either a game you don't play too often, or just as a relative beginner who just wants to go have that experience and chose to actually enter because you're not really sure how strong you are, that's what you should generally be hoping and looking for. That everything you practiced, you managed to do and hold together. That everything you didn't practice or know you haven't practiced enough turns out to be the reason you lost. That is our general aim for 2MK as a team, to know where our weaknesses are and hope it, and watch and try to make sure that the reasons we lose are those weaknesses. Whether they be the psychological issues with patience, dropping instant air stomp into like kick, legs, combos, poor optimization somewhere. But the thing we want to make sure that we don't encounter is losing due to complete character unfamiliarity. And while if you're not super into Street Fighter V, you probably don't have all of the characters, you may know some friends that have them. You may have some other ways to find chances to train them. Or if you're good at theory, you can probably figure out some of what needs to be trained in particular ways based on the performance of our bots. Even if you don't have the bot yourself, watching this guidance can give you some idea of how to try to approach something. And you can just go, well, I don't have that bot, or I haven't really faced this character, I don't know the principles behind it, their hurt boxes might be weird, some things like that. A good example of this is Abigail. Part of the reason why we decided so early to make Abigail a bot partially about hitboxes and hurtboxes, and cross-ups particularly, is because Abigail's hurtboxes are weird. Best we can tell, as we've been saying for a while, they seem to be a little shifted forward compared to where most people expect it to be. His push box and his hurt box are not in the same configuration as everyone else. Or so it seems. It might be because of moves he does. But there are some important things to know there too. Understanding as much as possible about your character and situations helps you deal with that sort of loss. One good example is a recent one from my shifts and training. No guards, counter hit. Random. Here we go. Well, please watch the following combo. Or rather, in this case, not combo. As soon as you see the counter hit come up on that crouching light kick, it means that this version of the combo is no longer going to work. This is because of something called counter hit pushback that we have had in other games. But it goes further than that. This combo just doesn't work on Abigail. Like, specifically Abigail. And I wouldn't have known that. For some reason, this version of it works, but this has more to do with the way the crouch light kick works. I can absolutely confirm that this works on other characters, but just not Abigail. It has nothing to do with the range I cancel it at either. Meaning that if for some reason I wanted to do wake up stuff against Abigail and wanted to go for that full combo, or thought I could get a good punish off it, I have to use this one, which is functionally less stun, not necessarily much more less damage really. And practiced that a long time against Gal, so I'm not really concerned about it, but I don't want to be surprised in a match either. That said, if I end up losing a match because I automatically went for this and got beat up because my opponent mashed out super, so be it. That combo does, however, have a way to make it work. With really good execution, you can get this to wear off a standing light punch. However, the timing for this is a little strange sometimes. I practiced this a long time, a while ago, and probably, if I really need it, I can quickly restore the muscle memory. But there's a problem with that too. Muscle memory can be very, very precise at times. In my case, even though it seems like everything should be fine, if you've learned to play this in rhythm style, for whatever reason, it's either the spacing that Abigail ends up at, or something I even can't explain outright. And this is true for other characters too. When you counter hit that, whatever it is that I use to do this combo, my timing gets thrown off very slightly. I haven't confirmed this yet. It might just be that, hey, I've forgotten it. But I did definitely remember that on characters other than Abigail, and I've tested that somewhat, I can do it with some success when that does not counter hit. But this combo is actually really tight timing because unlike most other combos where the buffer will just protect you, Chun-Li must do this specifically based on the charge timing cancel. So even though that was a counter hit, I believe, I specifically delayed it a tiny bit, and I've been learning to delay it that tiny bit. But I get the feeling that when I've done it that way, because I'm really pushing myself hard to make that happen, I can actually feel a very slight difference in speed relative to how that works when I'm trying to do it this way with no counter hit, as opposed to trying to do it with counter hit. Meaning there's at least a small chance, even if it's just in my own head, that whether or not this counter hits determines whether or not I can land a combo. I can try to avoid the situation, especially since I haven't practiced this in a while. This is not really my go-to combo for most things at the moment. Even though there are definitely some characters against whom you'd want to do it. So if I lose to that, then so be it. Another thing that is generally interesting is that for some reason Abigail's hurt boxes seem to make it so that instant head stomp into light kick, if I could even do it standardly, behaves differently depending on all sorts of little things actually. Most of the time, if this is not timed perfectly, there's not much chance of a problem. You still get most of what you need. You can go fairly high up and still come back down with something. But what I have learned is that generally something about Abigail's hurt boxes means that he doesn't get hit at the time I expect him to, causing timing to shift. Again, could be completely in my head. Since no matter how much I grind this, I probably do it too fast. And I won't be counting on it either. But it is again possible that depending on what Abigail was trying to do when he got up that caused the counter hit, he would have shifted forward, meaning that anything I would do after this would fail. But on the other hand, Abigail is generally tall enough that if he were standing, I don't have to do that move, as I can just do head stomp twice. Either way, this particular thing is something I have not put in my style much, and therefore I've only been grinding for a couple of days. Meaning that if a match comes down to, can I get this off, and my opponent notices I don't and starts to punish it all the time, then I expect to have problems. If it is my best chance at the last moment to get back some advantage on an opponent who has been really strong with their offense, then absolutely trouble is happening. Especially since all of the combos that follow that are related to the same crouch-like kick thing. You can, in certain very specific situations against certain specific characters, land this, but again, their counter hit, what exactly they were doing at the moment that made them get the counter hit in the first place, as well as your execution, determine whether or not you get hit it. Fortunately, you can just probably hit the medium punch every time, since you're plus enough off the stomp that it won't matter. But once again, if I lose as a result of this interaction, then so be it. But let's look at something a little more spectacular. Depends on your perception of the game. This is not something that's likely to matter as much, since most Abigail players I would face off with would not have this problem. Abigail players who use his VT2 have a lot of great setups for it to make sure that you really can't do anything at all, and he has plenty of armor on it. But if I happen to face someone who does hit it from fairly far out, those who have watched some of our later open mic know that I have trained at least to some point to be able to throw his V trigger charge. It's relatively easy to do from close, but all the timing involved is about the same. My expectation, therefore, is that if I face an opponent who for some reason thinks they can finish me with this, knowing that Chun-Li doesn't necessarily jump all that well to get out of it, they may have some problems with that. But as with everything else, you do your best to test your success rate with any given thing you intend to do. And I'm not expecting 100%. I'm not even expecting 50% sometimes. If I have to do it without sound, it's harder. If I have to do it under certain stress conditions, it's harder. If I have to do it in the corner, it's harder. Similarly, with punishing things with instant air head stomp is another thing I can do, but don't expect to come up a lot, and sort of hope that I don't have to deal with. However, it is one of my better options against Blanka, and despite having Blanka bot and practicing all the punishes, playing neutral against Blanka is a different story. Not a thing I like doing with Chun-Li, and might switch to Colleen entirely. But if I somehow do end up doing it because of the rules of many tournaments that only the loser can switch, there is always that tiny chance that I'll face a player who has Blanka as their secondary, and I have to face off with them for at least one more match after winning before I even get the chance to switch to Colleen. That is actually almost exactly the sort of situation I'm referring to. I know that my best option for beating Blanka if my opponent who has just lost to me switches is to use instant air head stomp to punish and interrupt things that Blanka does. I don't have a whole bunch of other options I really like, but I know that my success rate with that is like 50%. Meaning, if I were in that situation in a match, do I go for it or not? It's a huge advantage in my fighting style if I manage it, and it's usually not too painful if I fail, but fail it too many times in a row and you're certainly going to lose anyway. Similar for certain forms of whiff punish and counterattacks against Abigail, as you've just seen. This matchup is kind of weird because they two have a lot of interesting interactions based on spacing and which moves Abigail has chosen to do. Learning every scramble isn't necessarily the best option. So, what should I do? If I have to face Abigail with Chun-Li, and my opponent is doing a lot of moving back and forward, using his avalanche press and nitro charge and similar, and not necessarily playing footsies, let's say I've won at footsies and they've decided to go ham a little bit. I have ways around this, but I haven't trained any of them enough to be confident fully. Similarly, for some reason, I seem to find crouch light kick into light kick legs into crouch light kick again into ES legs way more difficult than I should. Meaning that if that is the situation I find myself in, I'm either going to expect to not land the ES legs or fall into some other fault and potentially lose the match as a result. This comes up often with optimization. If you train a combo but are now in a more stressful situation, how do you know whether or not to go for the combo? Understanding yourself and your capacity to do certain things under pressure obviously helps. But what if it really relies on it in the matchup and you would basically have to succeed at it 100% of the time? This is a painful thing. Similarly, I haven't done a lot of work on that particular interaction. There are quite a few spacings, moves, and things opponents can do. Even if I did whiff punish it with that, I can't actually get any combo off it. And Chun-Li has a lot of things like that, and which is why I'm the one doing this demo, as in, I might just lose because I can't do the thing in question and there is no other alternative at all. Many characters have things with very tight timing like this, regardless of whether or not their actual execution of certain combos is difficult. But that's the fun of fighting games. You have something to train. You're not 100% day one. Be it safe jump setups, perfectly spaced mihis, perfectly timed stuff. All of that is part of the game. So, right now, sitting at home practicing normally, I have decent confidence that for whatever reason, mainly because of the timing buffer differences and so on, if I'm up against an Abigail, I'm not going to have too much trouble doing air legs. I don't necessarily have to do it instantly to solve the problems that he is presenting. A little late will do. Therefore, in this matchup, I'm just going to go for it. Even though I could still fail the move completely. Put myself in a really bad situation and lose. If I lose like that, I just won't be that bothered. However, if I realize that stress got to me and the reason I couldn't do it was the stress, then I have some psychological stuff to look through. A surprising opponent is a sad event. Depending on whether or not they're a surprise, is altogether new. Or if they're just doing something you didn't expect most people to do. It's always sad to lose in that way, but that is still a matter of you not training enough at whatever. For example, I have this terrible habit of not blocking Abigail's sweep correctly. If I'm in the zone, I'll probably block right. If I'm stressed out though, not expecting a lot. And therefore, we're running through bots this upcoming weekend before Shine for at least one more day, if not 1.5, to at least catalog that. If I'm losing to this, is this within expectations? Did I train enough to lose a different way? Should I be trying to do something different altogether because I can't get this done at all? All these things should be factored because you don't want your tournament experience to be just, I got bodied and you can't tell anyone how, why, or what you got out of it. Obviously, one hopes for the best, but that doesn't necessarily mean you take the risk of what hoping for the best means. especially in a world full of complex counter-hit confirms and highly variable spaced normals. But I believe I can give a better example of how this is supposed to work. So we'll move on from Abigail in a minute or two. There are a bunch more technical things, again related to psychology, stress, scrambles, other little things that we teach, that are likely to affect the team's performance at Shine. But what we want is above all to make sure that whatever does cause us to lose is either new and hopefully not completely unknown, just at some point leading up, even in the last few days, recognizing I don't know how to deal with this. I should do something about that. And then finally realizing, oh, it's too late. I probably can't practice that in the time required. I'll most likely lose regardless. And then being able to specifically decide, you know what, I'm not doing it. I'm not even going to train it. The chances of me winning because I spend 2 hours training this thing are way smaller than the chances of me making sure I win against a stronger player of a different character by practicing something else. And the only reason I'm still doing this is because a while back I managed to throw most of them, but I keep on throwing the ones that are right in front of me. And I still need to see, should I be confident if he's farther out, or should I just jump back or something? Of course, remember that doing this sort of practice against our bots may not always give you the correct data for punishes, so please make sure if you're doing tournament preparation to turn on your frame data and watch your situations more carefully so that you know whether or not the thing you're doing is actually advantaged. Okay, it looks like I'm not going to get any chances of that kind today, so let's move on to our other demo. Before we circle back around to Sagat to actually collect data and show how this can be done most effectively. We will of course use a matchup everyone is familiar with. But being familiar with a matchup usually means that you face that matchup more. And facing that matchup more means it might be a little bit harder to freak out the opponent because they, in turn, will have probably been used to fighting your character. This isn't true, of course, if you play one of the rarest characters in the game like I do, but there's still some things that matter. But the interesting thing about Ken, and why he's so important for this, is that Ken has a lot of situations in which he isn't that unsafe, and you can only really punish him if you are very on point about it. There are a lot of tiny reactions that are required to beat Ken fully with optimal combos, and not just end up giving him a lot of chances to do stuff you don't want him to do. One good example is the fact that Ken does that kick. And depending on which Ken bot you've been watching, as they're all very slightly different, you'll see different amounts of use of that kick. But one thing that's really important is that Chun-Li's punish for this kick can be difficult if you are in certain situations. If you were standing for the first hit of this kick and then crouched right afterwards, you may be just short of enough charge to do spinning bird kick, reducing you to your simplest possible punish. Crouch medium kick into stuff. This isn't that damaging though. You can use ES meter to get more stun, but depending on your situation this might be suboptimal also. What you want is to maximize the damage from this combo and potentially show your opponent that they don't have that fortune. Plus, the faster the move you start your punish for that one with, the better your chances of dealing with it under bad situations. So optimally, Chun-Li wants to use the full combo that you see often used at higher levels. The only problem with this is I suck at that combo. For many reasons. Mostly because it is a very difficult to space combo, and therefore being confident that you should even do it in matches is hard. So while I could grind it for a long time, that feeling of having done it in a match for the right timing would be harsher. And because the spacings I attack from tend to mean that it's easier to do this, and not worry so much about pushback, I'll have built up a lot more for just doing it straight from the medium punch. All muscle memory differences matter. Therefore I have to decide, am I going to go for this if I face a Ken who uses this move a lot? Should I train this? So far, my assumption has been no. Why? Because most Ken, after using that move too much and getting punished at all, will simply switch to not doing the second kick. It's not something they just mash out for no reason. But that combo is super dangerous, i.e. if Ken decides, I'm mashing now, and he has meter, you're taking the Shory Rapid damage. You don't want even the slightest chance of dropping a combo in that situation. But you really don't want Ken just whiffing that kick over your head and continuing to do his own stuff either. The final decision is, I'll go for the crouch medium kick or crouch light kick stuff and leave it. It's suboptimal. Depending on where I am spaced, it's not even going to end up in a knockdown or anything particularly good. But so be it. Because I've realized I can't consistently recognize when to do different versions of the other combo, and I don't feel comfortable. If I get to the point where I did feel comfortable, or somehow got to the point where my opponent's timing or Mihi was so good that I couldn't get away without using that, which again shouldn't be true because I should always be able to use the crouch light kick. Or if I'm so desperate for that damage or knockdown that I have to go the other way, then at least if I drop it and lose, I can say, I expected to drop that. I did not train that, so be it. It would be easy to think, well, I should just not do things I haven't trained in a tournament, but in order to play your best, especially if you've trained at least part way, sometimes you have to take those risks. But overall, cataloging why you expect to fail so that you're not disheartened, especially in your first match, because at tournaments these days, losing your first match doesn't mean anything. For some tournaments, you're playing round robin. Losing your first match might mean nothing at all. Generally, yes, the absolute winner of the tournament usually loses no matches in even that format, but sometimes there's some really hard matches going on and you do have someone who wins the entire thing having lost just one match. There are many players who have in the past made extremely brave and dangerous runs through the losers bracket after being thrown there fairly early at even some of our larger tournaments. Meaning you have to be able to have that presence of mind, that clarity to go, that was nerves, I can do better, that was something I hadn't practiced, the outcome was expected. Or even, I practiced that but I somehow couldn't do it against that character, maybe I should be careful. Ask around quickly for whoever you know understands that character. Does this work on them differently than others? You'd be surprised just how often that answer is yes. And psychology is quite weird. For example, since I'm going to be trying this for a little while, I'll give myself some more meter to make it less annoying. There are spacings at which Chun-Li can only hit after light legs with light kick. As noted, there are quite a lot of situations in which this doesn't work in the way you'd expect. For example, Ken crouches, minimum range, it works. Even with counter hit. Ken stands, and not a chance. it could simply be that I've actually managed to get myself to delay that the right amount, so now my muscle memory is for either a perfect in-between version or something like that. Best if I don't think about it too much. But I'm certainly not going to stress myself over dropping that in a tournament at this point. And as a mid-level player, or as someone who doesn't have a lot of time to practice, i.e. most pros have a lot of time to practice, and by comparison, even people who want to be good don't have that much time to devote to this, and can't keep up the same sort of high performance training regimens required to get over all the mental pitfalls. Meaning you have to adapt to them. But we're about to talking about this combo. For whatever reason, my mind really hates trying to do this combo and ending with the ES legs. I don't get too mashy, but it's annoying enough that I don't want to try it in a match. However, give me the same situation with medium kick into it, and even though I'll drop it, I can do that probably 80% of the time, and that probably 40%. Meaning that if I'm in a bad situation and I see the chance to get this done, I'll go for it. Because I know usually, at least if I fail on this one, that doesn't happen. I have to be thinking about it pretty hard before I start to fail the link from that to that. If I realize I've started to fail it, then I'll assume that I got too nervous, or there was something about my opponent, the setup, the system. Those are not things you can blame, because usually if you had practiced the combo fully, you wouldn't have a problem landing it under most adverse conditions. But I'll at least go for that. Whereas, in a tight situation, I'm probably not going to go for this one. You can't see my hands right now, but there's a lot more stress involved in doing that. Indicating that I'm not only unused to this and underconfident in it, I'm physically tiring myself out by trying it, which usually means that under a tense situation, you're likely to be stressed out if you fail entirely and feel really bad about yourself and get down on it. I would think I'd rather lose just from not even trying. This is often true for combos like Chun-Li's, where if you do it wrong, you are remarkably unsafe, where if you drop it midway, it's effectively a reset, and your opponent is still the one that has to worry. Again, it depends entirely on character, but you can learn things about the opponent that way too. For example, you could specifically choose to go for this early and see if they try to mash out. Or, if you went for it and dropped it twice and you think your opponent has a beat on you, don't go for it the third time. Just stop. And wait for that uppercut or whatever you expect to be coming. That way, your opponent doesn't get to take advantage of your tendency to drop thing A, and rather you get to take advantage of their expectation that you might. I, for example, will probably assume that I'm going to drop this and just block. Fortunately, I've actually built up a specific way of doing this so that if I'm going to drop it, I'm most likely going to also be blocking right after. Meaning that while I'll get blown up by invincible uppercuts and a certain set of whiff punishes in the game, there's not a whole lot of telegraphing going on. We often have tried to instill in people that if you're going to have a combo you can drop, or a move you can drop, learn to execute it in a way so that it either looks like a mix-up or causes a reset. That way, at least your drop does not advantage the opponent too much. Better still, if you can, learn to do it that way and retain those properties in your 80, 90, 100% success rate execution style. For certain moves you can do this, and for others you can't. But to close out the stream, we'll return to Sagat. And look at this a lot more clearly with a focused method. I'm specifically looking for things I do against this character that are probably bad ideas. And the bot can help you understand this whether or not the bot actually punishes you. If you've learned to look at certain parts of this game or to understand certain opponents, you don't necessarily need the bot to punish you for failing. You can just see that you should have been punished and make a mental note, I'm doing this too often. There's number one. I still have to get used to the range of Sagat's Tiger Uppercuts, particularly the light one. I'm obviously going to think to do certain things against it, but it looks like the range I expect him to move at relative to other characters is absolutely not the same. In short, if I see Tiger Uppercut, I may not be able to punish this move in the correct way at all, either because I'm too far away to do it period, or I expect him to move further forward than he does, and I hit the heavy kick and can't do it. There's a second part to this. As I noted before, certain of Chun-Li's moves rely a whole lot on where exactly she ends up relative to the opponent, in terms of which combo she should do. There's a bunch of specifics based on her max range things from this. For example, there the optimal combo would probably have been to dash in and actually do the medium punch. When I'm stressed though, I don't do that move. I know enough to know that I need to practice it, but this reaches in spaces where that won't. And even when the other might reach, if I flinch and mess it up, I'm going to end up too close to my opponent without a knockdown, which I don't want. If I must choose between getting max damage and getting the knockdown against a character like Sagat, then I'm going to take the knockdown. You can work out strategies of this type, but my big problem here now, as just mentioned, is he does moves like that, and I try to counter from a space that the counter doesn't work. Similarly, because I'm unused to the block stun of Tiger Knee and specific other aspects of it, the precise rhythms involved in doing her moves of that type feel a little unfamiliar right now. And for Chun-Li, even the slightest feeling of unfamiliarity on that particular combo can make you drop it at my level. I would probably, despite playing this character for so long, there's not a lot of situations in which your opponent gives you that opportunity in the first place. Especially for people who fight against me who tend to move to the other side of the screen rather than fighting directly close up. I don't often end up doing that combo in punish situations because I end up punishing with something else, or with punishing entirely. If I'm not thinking about it, I seem to be able to get it done a decent amount of the time. But if I am, there's stress involved. That, for example, is dropping the combo. If I were in a stressful situation, I would definitely want to go for the standard dash up light kick legs, even though the damage for that and stun are really a lot less. It's like 100 less stun. Depending on your situation, you might decide it might be worth trying to do this properly. It might be worth going for the stun. Tactically speaking, there's good reasons to do that there. An opponent who is high stun is not as likely to try to challenge you immediately, blah blah. But I'm quickly noting, against Tiger Knee, I might want to just do that. My opponent is close enough anyway. And it looks like if I time it right, and I get used to that, which might be a lot easier, I may be able to land that consistently enough that it doesn't matter. Of course, the entire point of Sagat Bot is to learn how to make this work when Sagat manages to make Tiger Knee plus or nearly plus. Therefore, I might want to do that sometimes. But I haven't practiced that either. Meaning that if I find myself in a match, and that is my best option for some reason, I really shouldn't be too surprised if I fail at it. And as you can see, when Sagat spaces Tiger Knee correctly, there's a chance that the follow-up to this will whiff. In fact, this is true of a lot of Sagat spacings. Therefore, in order to deal with this character fully, I would need to learn to confirm that Sagat is actually at a space for this combo to hit. And it's not even just like, oh, can I time this properly now? It is outright, will the medium kick even hit? Meaning that I have a lot of situations in which I'm going to want to hold back on those things and punish Sagat's moves. Or go for different things altogether from my stand medium punch. Similarly, the fact that he seems to end up at this really far out range when I hit him with the crush counter stand heavy kick means I may have to do some entirely different things and hope that they work out. So while this is easy practice, if I'm thinking of it as match conditions, I've already lost. I've lost from trying to do certain things and having incorrect expectations entirely. I expect it would take probably maybe a day or two of focused play to finish doing that for most of Sagat's moves. It'll be a little different for each one, and by that I mean like a day each, although I could probably get to 50% on most of them. But 50% is not tournament, 50% is casuals, 50% is what we go into sandbag with to see, can we do this under the condition. So I may be fine for the casual stations, but it's certainly not enough if I'm going to the tournament. If I'm going to the tournament, I'm going to be looking for every advantage I can get. And that is not necessarily one of them because that move scales terribly. But it at least changes that extremely far out spacing into a knockdown in certain situations that it might not have otherwise. So, if my opponent at Shine manages to beat me because I don't have enough practice with Sagat to get stuff right against him, I'm not going to stress about it. If I were a pro, I basically should have trained with Sagat specifically as much as I could. If I was a pro, I would have probably Sagat players to train with. But in addition to that situation, I also don't have a lot of people who play my character in very obvious places to find. Maybe I can find, by searching through CFN, some long set between Chun-Li and a Sagat. Actually, I can do this due to another friend who plays her, but as a general thing, there's probably going to be quite a bit of high-level Sagat tech that I'm just not going to know how to deal with at all for another month or so. But it would be absolutely imperative to not get stressed out by this and not let myself fall apart as a result of confusing Sagat things. We create the bots for at least partially that reason, to make sure that if you know your own character well, you can quickly explore counters for basic stuff. After all, bots are meant to help you when you are in the bronze and somewhat in silver against opponents who are not necessarily using the most developed strategies or the ones that are easier generally to execute as a whole. So, as noted, there will be no stream tomorrow, no Kame House. There will be no stream Friday, unless, again, we, for some reason, decide to stream our actual close training, which would probably, again, not be at the same time. It might, but it's unlikely. Therefore, the next stream you should expect from the 2MK team is our Monday Mishmashing Lounge, which will be smaller due to some people being in transit. Feel free to stop by then and get whatever report we have, though we will be covering that a little bit more next week, Wednesday, either as part of a Sandbag Casual segment or as its own segment if we happen to do particularly well. If you have interest, we can at least come back with a report of what we ended up losing to and whether or not it was intended to be trained on and therefore we failed to actually do what was required. Or if it all went perfectly and regardless of win or lose, everything we wanted to do and had trained to do got done. Therefore, enjoy your weekend, and happy training. This has been Rillian, 14 to MK. Good night, everyone.